You're listening to Word on the Reef, diving into marine science on the Great Barrier Reef and beyond, with Tanya Murphy and Brett Goodban. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Word on the Reef. I'm your host, diver and marine conservationist Tanya Murphy. Diving solo today as my trusty dive buddy Brett Goodban is away. Now, today's topic is a really interesting one. We're going to be talking about city-slicking fish. What does that mean? Of course, we all know the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park finishes at the shore of Queensland. But did you know that some Great Barrier Reef fish species are spending part of their life cycle right here in the middle of our city? That's right, marine fish species could be as close as your nearest concrete stormwater drain, swimming among abandoned shopping trolleys and discarded beer bottles. And that makes sense because the city of Cairns was built on reclaimed mangrove swamps and tidal wetlands, which were nurseries for many marine fish species. Early settlers cleared the mangrove and raised the land level by 2 to 4 metres using dredge spoil from Trinity Inlet and leftover rocks and soil from building the Cairns to Kuranda Railway. They channeled the meandering natural waterways into straight, narrow concrete drains, like Lily Creek and the Fernley Creek Drain, which today carry rainfall to Trinity Inlet and also fill partially with salt water during high tide. So, what sorts of animals are still inhabiting these urban waters? What impacts have they suffered as a result of all this change? And what can we do right here in our backyard to help restore their habitat as best we can? To help explore our urban waterways, my guest today is Phil Laycock, manager of the Cairns Saltwater Creek Habitat Restoration Project with Ozfish Unlimited. Good morning, Phil, and welcome to Word on the Reef.
Good morning, Tanya. Thanks very much for having me on the show today.
It's great to have you here. To start off, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Well, I'm a Cairns boy, born and bred. Married a Tully cane farmer's daughter. Went to uni in Townsville, did marine biology. Spent the first half of my career or so out there on the reef, working in tourism and research out there. And then for the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park Authority, worked in a regional role here in Cairns. And then I've spent the time since 2018 providing some consultancy services, focusing on urban water quality mostly. And from 2024, started working with Ozfish Unlimited as a project manager here in Cairns.
What is Ozfish all about and what do they do?
I think the easiest way to think about Ozfish, because most people are familiar with Landcare Australia. So Ozfish is kind of like Landcare, but it's all about the fish, and it was started by fishermen, and it makes that connection between healthy habitat and healthy fish stocks. A lot of other stuff in between that, of course, a lot of other environmental benefits, but that's what Ozfish is all about.
Yeah, so it was started by recreational fishers, which is hugely popular in Queensland. It's estimated around 1 in 5 Queenslanders will go fishing at least once in any given year. So that's a hugely important segment of the population. How interested are recreational fishers in being good caretakers and stewards of fish populations and habitats?
Oh, they're very interested, Tanya. Ozfish Unlimited's got 52 chapters all around the country. They're active in every state. Our volunteers have contributed around 50,000 volunteer hours during the last financial year.
Wow.
Yeah, lots and lots. And we work across the area. So fishers get it. You know, they do understand that good habitat means good fishing, better habitat, better fishing.
Yeah, absolutely. So you have been a keen recreational fisher for most of your life. What changes have you seen in the fish populations in Cairns waterways over that time?
Well, some good things and some bad things. I guess some of the little urban creeks that I used to run around in as a kid, catching snake-headed gudgeons and turtles and yabbies and those sorts of things, have been channelized and changed. But there's still plenty of little nooks and crannies around there that we can help. But some of the positive things are there's more barramundi around now. You know, that started not just on the back of the net-free zone here in Cairns, but back in the 1980s when Fisheries Queensland established a closed season to allow the barramundi to spawn. So we see some good things and some bad things, but still able to go and have a great time on the water around Cairns here. Just a lot more people around. So we all need to be good stewards and take care while we're out there. Look after the fish and look after the environment as well.
Yeah, so speaking of that, you've got a project that you're running here in Cairns. Can you tell us a bit about that?
The key project I think that we're going to focus on today is the habitat restoration project that's focusing on the Saltwater Creek catchment. That includes Lily Creek, the Cairns Central Swamp area, Fernley Street Drain. I wish we had a better name for that. Just remember, everybody, that drains are actually creeks. So they look like a drain or a gutter, but they were once creeks and they've just been changed. They've just been straightened, sometimes concrete lined, but they are creeks. So let's start calling them creeks. Mm. So, yeah, in that area, we've got lots of concrete, but we've also got some areas of habitat that haven't been lined with concrete. And some of those areas have got lots of weeds in them, that sort of stuff, not much shade. They get cleaned out by the council using machinery to maintain the flood control that we need to do in there. And our project's about doing that better. So it's about planting trees on the bank. It's about doing some hands-on weed management. So with more shade, we get cooler water, less weeds. It means in the longer term we'll be needing to go in less with those mechanical kind of weed management options. We're creating more habitat, so multi-dimension habitat. I mean, a lot of our little urban waterways that are very open, we've just got one dimension and we tend to see tilapia dominating those. But when we find waterways where we've got bankside cover, shades, controlled weed growth, that sort of stuff, we get a lot more diversity of fish species in those areas. So trees, weeds, litter are the focus of that project.
When and how did this urban waterway restoration project start?
So Ozfish began in 2016, so we're 10 years old in Australia. I kicked off the chapter here in Cairns in 2018. We did a few litter cleanups, a bit of tilapia work, but we had an opportunity at the time to get involved in a process that the Cairns Regional Council was doing, focusing on Saltwater Creek. Lynn Powell was there at the time. And with our interests and the interests that the council had, we were able to find some funding to provide greater capacity for council and Lynn to do more community engagement. We held a few workshops. We came up with some solutions for water quality. And from those solutions, Ozfish were able to develop some project ideas, and we were able to start to get out there and look for some funding. We were lucky enough to get a commitment a couple of elections back for some funding for that work in Saltwater Creek. You know, the Labor government did win that election. We did get that funding coming through the Department of Environment, Climate Change and Water. And it's on the back of that we've really built our capacity here in Cairns since 2024 to get in there and do some really serious work.
One aspect of your project involves monitoring fish and water quality in these Cairns waterways. How do you go about doing that, and what have you discovered?
Well, one of the first things that the chapter did in Cairns way back in 2018 was scrape together a few dollars and get the wonderful Brendan Ebner, who's one of the most respected freshwater fish biologists that we have here in the tropics of Australia. And Eb went and did some surveys for us, and we started to build our knowledge about what fish are living in the waterways. Understanding that helps you understand what you can do for the fish, obviously, and the consequences of that are also improving the habitat. So since 2018, we've been using a variety of methodologies to monitor the waterways, everything from camera traps. So we drop little GoPro cameras in, set them for standard times, go through the footage once a year or so. We do a more thorough survey with electrofishing equipment. So that's using a battery backpack, puts a charge into the water. The fish are stunned momentarily, come to the surface. It's a good way of getting a really good understanding of the diversity of life. And then we use a mixture of sort of traps and small seines and scoops and visual observations as well. So from that, since 2018. We've recorded over 60 species in our urban waterways, from the estuarine areas right up to the foot of the ranges here, fish species. 5 or 6 introduced species, tilapia, gouramis, pleiades, and a few things like that, but everything else is native to our area.
Where do all those introduced species come from? Did they escape from people's aquariums?
Yeah, mostly aquarium escapees. There's a long story behind the tilapia. They sort of first arrived in North Queensland, introduced in the 1980s by someone who thought they were doing the right thing to control, I think, weeds in the lakes at the Sheridan Mirage when they were being built in the mid-1980s. And since then they've been sort of accidentally and sometimes purposely relocated in our rivers and streams, and they're pretty much well established now.
I had no idea it was another case of the sort of cane toad where they introduced it on purpose to try and control something else, a natively occurring thing, and then it just became a massive problem.
I think the tilapia thing means that a lot of people, they're very visible, the tilapia. Their nature is to sort of be out, they school together. They've been quite effective at colonising our waterways. So a lot of people right off our urban waterways, our local drains.
Because you see those everywhere.
Yeah, our local drains. Remember, we're calling them creeks, so I'm going to call them creeks now. And so they see those and they think, oh, there's nothing in there but tilapia. But as I said before, if we build a more complex habitat, if we've got sort of a bit of edge vegetation, shade, snags, some little deeper zones in there, patches of running water or riffles and those sorts of things, we get a lot more rooms, if you like, in the habitat for different species to occupy. So tilapia are not a predator, but they are very territorial and they tend to chase other fish away from their area. So having more rooms, the tilapia like those softer bottoms, open areas where they can filter the detritus and that sort of stuff. We have more rooms in the habitat, we get more fish species. And that's what we're trying to do, create more room, more spaces in the habitat to get more species.
More hidey holes.
That's it, absolutely.
So for any listeners who aren't familiar, tilapia are stripy, aren't they? Sort of silver with black stripes?
Browny, stripy and spotty. We've got 2 species here. One is more stripy and one is more spotty. One tends to be a little lower down, has a bit of a higher salinity tolerance than the other one. And they grow to about 35, 40 centimetres. They're the most farmed fish in the world, interestingly.
Oh, so do people actually eat them in some places?
Lots of people eat them in some places. People eat them in Cairns. I know people that fish for them in some of our larger rivers and things like that. We're not supposed to keep them. We're supposed to, if we catch them, we're supposed to dispose of them humanely and discard them away from the water, but we're not supposed to retain them under the fisheries rules and regulations.
You mean you're not supposed to throw them back?
Not supposed to release them, and they're not supposed to take them home because they are a mouth brooder at a stage in their life. So we might take a fish home, take the fillets off it, throw the backbone into another waterway, and those eggs or larvae might still be alive, and then that's how we can start a new population of tilapia. Yeah.
Okay. Good tips for anyone, because even young kids are out there just throwing lines in and not really knowing what they're doing sometimes.
I see plenty of people down at Lily Creek deliberately targeting the tilapia and dispatching of them humanely, and it's a good thing. It's a fun thing to do. Lots of fun for the kids. I'd like to talk about some of the cool fish that live in the waterway.
Yeah, let's do that.
We
Tell
can.
us, what cool fish are there?
Like I said, we don't want to get confused and just think, oh, what's the point of looking after these waterways? They're just full of tilapia. Our fish surveys, let's look at Lily Creek, for example. Right there at the end of Gatton Street, electrofishing there, we've caught barramundi over 500 millimetres in length.
Wow.
We've had people report barramundi to 700 millimetres of length in there.
Wow.
We regularly catch 3 size classes of barramundi when we do our surveys in there, so 120, 270 and 500 mil sort of fish, so 1, 2 and 3 year old fish. So that waterway is working as a really important nursery environment. Once it was a chain of wetlands, so we would have had more space, more juvenile barramundi, but now we've sort of got a channel. So again, that's really cool. Mangrove jacks, lots of mangrove jacks in there, mostly small fish. We see them as small as 20 millimetres, which is about the size where you can start seeing them reasonably with your eyes, up to 300 or even 400 millimetres in those little waterways. But again, we're looking at a juvenile fish, and And that's the classic, I guess, fish that connects the reef to our urban waterways. So we'll talk a little bit about mangrove jacks, if that's all right. So mangrove jacks that we catch in those waterways, if we go fishing in Trinity Inlet and we catch a nice 40 centimetre mangrove jack and we take that home for a meal, none of those fish have actually sexually matured. They're all still juveniles and are up here in Cairns at around about that sort of 45 to 50 centimetre size range. In the wet season, they migrate out to the reef, and that's where they mature sexually. They'll grow to 7 or 8 kilos out there, occasionally bigger than that, but that's where they spawn. They spawn out there on the deep water pinnacles, and then their larvae come back inshore on the trade winds and on the northeast winds that we get over the summer, and those little fish then swim up those urban waterways and they start to grow and mature in there. So it just shows you how connected we are to the reef through our urban waterways. You know, there's other species. Think about some of the batfish species as well. Things like milkfish, tarpon that are near shore water, but I see milkfish right out there on the outer edge of the reef as well. Trinity Inlet is home to juvenile leuchanids or tropical snappers, so nanny guys if you like, lethrinids, so sweet lips, so tricky snappers and things like that. And while those fish mightn't get up into our urban waterways, they're still influenced by what's happening in there. So we're really connected. And if we take one link out of that chain, take water quality out of there, take habitat out of there, overfish the spawning stock out on the reef, we start to see those populations collapsing. So looking after those urban waterways is one thing we can do as fishers to help water quality, what we do in our backyard, picking up litter, planting some trees, all of those sorts of things, as well as being responsible when we're out on the water and taking what we need, respecting the rules, using fish-friendly gear. So if we do get a fish that swallows the hook right down, we can better off cutting the line and letting it go and we'll get rid of it rather than trying to dig it out, those sorts of things. Some good practices there for the fishermen.
When I've been out on the outer Great Barrier Reef diving, I sometimes see mangrove jacks, the fully grown ones, and I didn't learn until much later that when I was living in a high-rise apartment building in the middle of the city, just near Gatton Street, that there could also be some just a few hundred metres away from where I was living, but in a much younger stage of their life cycle.
Oh, it's incredible the numbers that you see up the top end of Saltwater Creek at one of our monitoring locations up there. The numbers of little mangrove jack from 20 millimetres to 120 millimetres is just amazing. Jungle perch is another one that fishers love. We've recorded 8 different species of gudgeons, so everyone's familiar with the snake-headed gudgeon or mud cod. Well, we've got the sleepy cods. We get this beautiful spangled gudgeon in there, all sorts of different gudgeon species, rainbow fish, blue eyes, hardy heads, this incredible range. There's these nifty gobies with a big nose, unfortunately called Roman nose gobies that we find. They're just the number of fish that we see. I did forget to mention that we also are working with researchers to develop what we call eDNA monitoring. So this is where you take water samples and everything in the water is going to shed its DNA. So we can take a water sample and get an idea of what fish species are in the water. That's proving quite successful. It's matching our electrofishing surveys really well. On the northern beaches of Cairns, we've got really strong signals for cling gobies, which is this really interesting little known goby family that lives at the bottom of waterfalls in these really steep, short coastal catchments. So those urban waterways don't look pretty. They're still doing a really important thing in that fish diversity, maintaining what's been here for millennia.
It's absolutely amazing. I think if more people realise this, then they would be a bit more respectful towards considering them creeks instead of drains, especially with regards to people just sort of littering around them and litter getting washed into them. So definitely the awareness being raised about that is really important. I mean, hearing about all these incredible species just makes me want to grab a snorkel and jump in the drain, but that probably wouldn't be a good idea, maybe because of the water quality, I guess. What did you discover about the water quality in these waterways?
Look, we've got a lot of legacy issues. We live in a much more enlightened society these days, so things that were common practices in our industrial areas and waste transfer facilities and those sorts of things we don't do anymore. But we've got a lot of legacy issues, so a lot of hangover from there. And I guess the key to those things is about minimising disturbance in the habitat. So again, planting trees, getting the weeds managed so that they're in a natural state, not in this boom-bust stuff that we see. We're kind of keeping a lot of that locked in the soil, we're not locked in the surrounds. Obviously, just driving our car around, we're putting stuff onto the roads and that runs in there and that sort of stuff. Keep your car maintained, pick up your dog poo. Simple stuff like that. Take your old paint tins to the waste transfer station. Don't just dump them in the green bit to go in a landfill. Lots of things that we can do around our homes. It's just me. But what have we got, 160,000 people in the Cairns and the surrounds right now, Let's say we've got 30,000 households, let's say 1,000 paint tins a year go into the landfill. That's 1,000 paint tins that we can keep out of landfills, and that will decay away and leach into the system. So lots of stuff that we can do, but to see the diversity of life that we see in there means that we've actually probably got water quality that's a bit better than what a lot of people think.
You mentioned that sometimes when it's time to clear them out so that they don't clog up, there's a lot of machinery just digging them up, and that's probably releasing any toxins in the bottom of the creeks? Yeah,
potentially so. I think one of the things that you'll see, and I often get people sending me a message or asking me about it, when we do disturb that sort of edge vegetation, there's sort of a natural decay process going, and you can get what looks like a bit of an oily film on the surface. It's a sort of a natural feature. It's, that decaying process kind of as the vegetation's turning to mush, if you like. We do get fuel pollution in the creeks, so someone does the wrong thing, a car has a prang and the fuel tank leaks, or someone's got a car that they're not looking after and it drips oil, and we'll get those sorts of pollutions there. We do sometimes have to use chemical methods, so knockdown sprays. We're very careful with how and where we use those sprays, but we'll just be using those sorts of things at the very beginning, really, to get over that hump. And then once we're over the hump, we can start doing the hand weeding work. I spent some time down at Lily Creek near the end of Gatton Street with the Gimoy Wallaburra Yidinji Rangers about a month ago. And we only worked on around about 70 metres of the creek bank there, and just right on the edge of the bank, just hand weeding, just pulling out paragraphs and Singapore daisy and that sort of stuff. It was 5 cubic metres of stuff. But that's given us an opportunity now to go back there and do a little bit of selective spot spraying rather than just spraying the whole lot. We can now go back and do a little bit of selective spot spraying, back that up with hand weeding. I'll work with the council in the next month or so to take the bulk weed out of the middle, and hopefully we can hold that back along that area up to Florence Street for years to come.
So, Phil, you've been holding regular tree planting events along these urban waterways, and as you already touched on, removing weeds at the same time. What are the benefits of carrying these activities out?
We touched on before the idea of building a more complex habitat, so shade to cool the water during the hot summer, making the water more comfortable and tolerable for fish to live in, managing the complexity of the environment, so opening up sort of the deeper holes and little riffles and those sorts of things. We're working on 1.5 kilometres of waterway across the catchment, and our goal is to eventually plant out close to about 2 hectares of that riparian zone. Long, thin strips, sort of 2 to 4 metres wide. There's some needs for maintenance down there, public safety, those sorts of things. So we can't plant a whole forest and turn it back into a rainforest creek, but we can stabilise those edges, capture a lot of runoff, create more habitat, and shade the water and get some great outcomes. So, 1.5 kilometres of waterways. We've just secured some more funding and we'll do another sort of 800 metres on the back of that. So, by the middle of 2028 or so, we should have had about 2 kilometres of saltwater in Lily Creek with nice riparian vegetation beginning to establish.
Yeah, so you talked about removing weeds. What damage do weeds do on these urban waterways?
Weeds really are a part of the environment. So we do want weeds. So we got something called paragrass here. So paragrass provides that edge vegetation. But what happens where you've got a shady area, it'll be a little bit sparser, it won't grow particularly quickly, and it won't choke out the system. But when you don't have any vegetation, any shade or anything like that, it'll choke out the system. We've got to introduce things like water spinach as well. Singapore daisy to a lesser extent, but the Singapore daisy will tend to creep out on top of the paragrass and the water spinach. And in those open areas, it forms such a thick mass that it'll actually effectively work a bit like a dam. If we get a lot of hot weather, the rate of decay of the dead vegetation in the water can take oxygen out of the water. It can cause fish deaths due to eutrophication. But the main issue is for our public safety. So, as you said right at the beginning, our local waterways are treated as drains. They do help us live here. They do help us during those heavy rainfall events. So periodically the council needs to remove that bulk weed mass out of the creek, and we're essentially resetting the creek every time we do that back to a bare open space. And then over the 12-month period in some cases, or 5-year period in other cases, that will slowly recolonise. We'll get a more complex habitat, and then we repeat the process. So we're trying to lengthen those periods between those intensive management events. We need to have that so that we can live happily in Cairns and not be walking around in floodwaters. But we can do it in a way that's going to help the fish as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So it might be too early to tell, but does replanting all this vegetation increase the number of fish? It's probably been tested in other locations, right?
Yeah, look, there's lots of evidence, As I said, the motto of Ozfish is better habitat, better fishing. So go and have a look at a concrete drain, no habitat, no fish, or very few anyway. Go and have a look at a section of one of our waterways where we've got a greater complexity of habitat, trees, grasses, those sorts of things, and we start to see fish species there. So, yes, that's the goal. That's the goal, is to, at very least, help sustain what's in there. Like I said, we've got underwater footage clips and one screenshot with 25 plus little juvenile jungle perch in there. We've got screenshots with 4 or 5 juvenile mangrove jack in there. There's lots and lots of these juvenile species in our waterways. So at the very least, make it as healthy and sustainable for those fish to live in as it possibly can.
Yeah, and it is a nicer area to go. There's a nice walking path along Lily Creek that I used to enjoy, and you can see a lot of nature, like dragonflies, and all the trees have kookaburras, and sometimes you can stand on the bank and look at the fish and think, wow, who knew that this was all right next to the highway?
I haven't had one person walk past when we've been down there doing, whether it's litter clearing or whether it's fish monitoring or whether it's planting trees or weed management. I haven't had one person that hasn't walked past, that hasn't shared how much they love the area and how much they appreciate the work that we're doing. So there's lots of people in the community that probably aren't aware of these wonderful walking and cycle paths. They follow all of our waterways. They're wonderful places to be.
Yeah, well, highly recommend to all of the listeners out there, go and check out the walking paths along Lily Creek and so on. It's a nice little green space right in our backyard of the concrete jungle of the city. Now, you've mentioned that another threat to these urban waterways is litter. How bad is the litter problem in these creeks, and what sort of litter are you finding the most?
Urban generated litter. What would you expect to find? Ask anyway. What are we going to find today? We're going to find chip packets. We're going to find fast food packets. We're going to find discarded household items. We're going to find bottles, cans, all of that sort of stuff. People, unfortunately, still dump illegally, so we do get some larger items. bikes, shopping trolleys, bed frames, you name it, we've found it.
That shows a real misunderstanding of the area. People think, oh, it's just a drain, so I'm going to use it as a trash can.
Yeah. And I think it says something about the fact that, a lot of people in the world don't see the beautiful green, they just see a drain, and that's why I think it's so important for us to, whenever we can, remind people that they are creeks, they are important to us.
Yeah. Well, I was very privileged to join you for one of the cleanups, and just on that one day we found so much stuff, including a mattress that was a bit of a struggle for you guys to get out of the water, and a sofa and a bicycle and a shopping trolley. So, yeah, it was...
And all the other bits and pieces as well.
All the other bits and pieces, yeah. Very satisfying to get all that stuff out.
Good news story about that location, though, Tanya, is that we've been targeting that area. It's a hotspot for us. It's there's a
high
walkway,
foot traffic, yeah.
High foot traffic, walkway crosses there, close to takeaway food outlets, all of those sorts of things. We've been targeting that area there, and it does attract the homeless situation as well. And it's unfortunate that we still live in a world where people are forced to find somewhere other than a home to live in. But the good news is that the last time we went back there during the Clean Up Australia month, we found less litter. And to the point where we spent a whole heap of time there and just got one bag of litter. And the first time we went there with less people, we filled 2 utes with litter.
Wow.
So by going back a couple of times a year and doing intensive work in areas, we've kind of got rid of the legacy stuff. So now we're
just
starting
keeping on
to
top
map.
of it.
Yeah, so we're starting to map those other areas. So we go back there regularly now to plant trees and manage weeds, and we do a bit of litter pickup while we're there. So we're sort of staying on top of it there. We need to find those other hot spots around Cairns to get rid of that legacy stuff and have a great impact. So by working together with people like you and other community members, Ozfish volunteers and people that live in the area, we've had a real impact on that zone of the creek. And if you walk along the creek, about 80% of the litter is concentrated there. So it's had a big impact, positive impact.
Yeah, and I think when you are down there and people walk past and talk to you, hopefully it makes them less likely to throw their trash in it after they've seen all the effort that you guys have put in to clean it up in the first place.
Absolutely. I think people are starting to have conversations amongst themselves. If they see someone hasn't been particularly thoughtful, people can politely remind them about thinking about what they're doing.
Yeah. So you're sort of in the middle of the rollout of all this restoration, but do you know what the impact has been so far and what are the goals moving forward?
So we've pretty much done 75% of the planting that we aim to do along Lily Creek, and we've completed most of that in the first months of this year. We try to coincide our planting with the wet season, so those new plants have got water coming from the sky, nothing like water from the sky to get a plant established. Over the coming months, we're starting to plan for our planting beginning on the first rains at the end of the year around the upper end of Saltwater Creek, around Jensen Street Park. We'll be doing some up there. We're also going to work through some of these drier months. You'll notice a lot of the waterways in Cairns, a lot of the creeks in Cairns have got one bank with trees on and one bank that's open, and that's to allow council access. But you do see on those open banks, the bank tends to slump, and that adds sediment. It means you've got to go back there and dig the sediment out again. So we're working with a number of species, mangrove holly and mangrove fern. We've found that we can propagate the mangrove holly in particular quite well. And we're working with council, and we hope to plant a lot of mangrove holly along the toe of the bank. So that's the part of the bank that's just right down at water level. And mangrove holly, as the name suggests, are a mangrove associate. They tend to grow at the upper end of the tidal systems, and by planting those mangrove holly along the toe, we're creating habitat, we're stabilising the bank. The council can still get over the top to do their maintenance after a flood event or something like that. So not all of what we do is pretty trees, but still having great outcomes for the environment. Moving sediment, creating edge vegetation, creating a more complex habitat. So that's what we'll be doing under this current project over the next 18 months or so. Finishing off Lily Creek, mostly up around Florence Street is the work that we'll do. Bit of infill planting there, lots of weed management, and starting these new plantings. As I said, we got some additional funding take us through until about mid-2028 on this project.
Yeah, awesome project. Are there any other aspects to the creek restoration work that you'd like to talk about which we haven't already covered?
Follow Ozfish Cairns on Facebook, and we advertise all of our events along there. We invite people to come along to our monitoring events, our tree planting events, our litter cleanup events. We advertise all of those on our Facebook page, so get involved. Go to the Ozfish website and become a member. That'd help us out a lot. In a couple of weeks' time, BCF, who's our main sponsor for Ozfish Australia, they hold a weekend where they promote donations to Ozfish. It's called Small Change for Big Change. It's the weekend of the 6th and 7th of June. So if you're out and about and you're jumping into a BCF store, while you're in there, you can round up to the nearest dollar, and that money will go into Ozfish. We'll be in the stores, so you can come and have a chat to us there. We'll have a QR code. You can sign up to a digital membership for free. And yeah, get involved. Give us a hand.
Awesome. Go and check it out, everyone. So, Phil, I understand you're interested in doing some shellfish reef restoration here in Cairns, and there's a really good precedent because the Waterways First Nations people in Keppel Island on the southern end of the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park have already carried out a shellfish reef restoration project in their sea country. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, so shellfish reefs, they can be oysters, depending on where you are in Australia, mussels, all sorts of hard encrusting organisms as well in those areas. So for about the last 8 years, Ozfish chapters all around the country, from the Swan River, where they're facilitating the growth of mussel reefs. Moreton Bay was the sort of birthplace of our shellfish revolution, as we call it. And we now see these projects playing a big role in South Australia with the algae bloom down there. So the Ozfish are doing a lot of work with shellfish reefs down there because they're great filters for the environment. And here in the Great Barrier Reef catchment area, we've got funding to build shellfish reefs in our harbours from Gladstone up here to Cairns over the next couple of years. And I met with Ports North and Gimoy Wallaburra Yidinji traditional owners on Tuesday this week to finalise where we're going to start this project. So so we're looking at that area from about Wharf 1 down to the Marlin Jetty, and we'll be starting off with about 40 metres of foundations for oyster colonisation. People will say, there's already oysters down there. Yeah, but there's no reef structures down there. If you have a real good look down there, what you'll see is, there's oysters on the pylons, the nice vertical pylons, the really old pylons. The oysters on the newer pylons, they tend to get removed as part of the maintenance for the port. That's okay. We need to do that. But the rocks themselves that the rock wall's built of are generally very flat surfaces, and you'll notice the oysters just grow on the edges. And that's because the flat surfaces get really hot. They're granite rocks, obviously. They get really hot, and it's not a great habitat. So we're going to introduce a basket structure called a quilted oyster doona.
Ooh. And
a module of an oyster doona is about 1 metre long, 3 modules around about 150, 200 mils wide and about the same height. We fill that up with oyster shells, and that gives us this nice 3-dimensional habitat that stays a bit cooler. We attach them with masonry anchors to the rocks and allow the oysters to colonise. Oyster reefs were part of all of our coastal ecosystems once upon a time. When Europeans first came to Cairns and settled Cairns, we would have had oyster reefs around that area that we're working in today. You know, we look at shell middens and things like that from the traditional owners, lots and lots of oysters in there, you know, and not just the species that we see growing from commonly on the mangrove roots, other species, you know. So oyster reefs would grow on the edge of muddy flats once upon a time, and they would form big structures. If anyone's ever been up to Marpoon, you'll see some massive oyster reefs up there. But those oyster reefs were mined literally by the early Europeans here They were crushed, they were burnt, and that was an important ingredient in making cement. So some of the old foundations of some of the old buildings here, you can see shell and coral and all sorts of stuff in there. And we lost all our oyster reefs, so now we're turning to reintroduce them to our environment.
It's terribly sad how they were all lost, but it's very exciting how you're reintroducing them.
You don't know what you don't know, though.
And they didn't
1880, it was a resource. We didn't have the knowledge we have today. So we can be sad about the loss, and we can't be critical of the people at the time who didn't know what we know today.
Yeah, and like you said, the Indigenous people that was their supermarket. They just walked down the coast and they could get oysters. I mean, how much we pay to eat oysters nowadays because they're a delicacy, but there used to be a lot more that they could just grab off the seashore, and unfortunately a lot of them are lost. So it's really good to hear that there's this methodology that's proven effective for getting them to come back. So you fill up the frames with oyster shells because oyster shells attracts other oysters.
Yeah, it's a perfect environment. If you look at an oyster shell, it's quite rough. There's lots of little nooks and crannies. So if you're an oyster larvae or an encrusting tube worm or a leaf oyster larvae or something like that, there's a nice little nook that you can anchor yourself into. Even some of the sponges and, we still get a few corals growing in the inlet, those sorts of things. It's a perfect habitat. And because we've got that sort of three-dimensionality, we don't have a big flat wide, smooth surface facing the sun. They're cooler, and it's just the best way to do it. We also use robust oyster baskets in other parts of Australia, which are kind of triangle-shaped baskets as well. So it's the way. We're just kicking off that project here, so keep an eye out. We'll be publicising that. We'll be looking for oyster shell supplies from restaurants, and that's just kicking off now.
Yeah, well, amazing. Yeah, I was going to ask where you're going to get all the oyster shells, but obviously you'll be partnering with restaurants. So
restaurants and seafood processors, all of that sort of stuff, and we need a supply of shell to create the foundations.
Yeah, and so do you think that'll have a benefit to the water quality in the inlet?
Yeah, look, I mean, we probably need a Green Island reef size oyster reef to make a big change in water quality. But yeah, look, the more oysters, the more filters we've got out there, the more water that's going through. Oysters process huge volumes of water in a day, so they will have a role, particularly in those edges around the port where probably a lot of those sorts of pollutants are concentrated.
Yeah, well, it's a good start. And then, if that goes well, maybe we can put more oyster beds.
But habitat too. Great habitat, food, the food chain, the whole thing, not just about water quality, but it's habitat as well.
Yeah. Well, it's a really exciting project. Sadly, we're just about to come up to the 11 o'clock news, so that's all we have time for today. Phil Laycock, manager of the Cairns Saltwater Creek Habitat Restoration Project with Ozfish Unlimited. Thanks for all your amazing work, and thanks for joining us on Word on the Reef today.
Thanks, Tanya. It was great to be here, and we'll catch up again sometime, and we'll give an update. And we've got a few other projects going on I'd love to talk about as well.
Is there any last comments that you'd like to make before we sign off?
Look, seagrass, we're sort of doing some work with trop water around seagrass. We've got a partnership out at the airport helping reconnect mangroves. Part of the Saltwater Creek project is improving the water exchange between the wetlands at the base of the Yellow Arrow and Saltwater Creek so we don't get water trapped in there and fish kills. Lots of stuff going on.
Thanks, listeners, for joining us on Word on the Reef with me, Tanya Murphy. We'll be back next week with more marine science adventures. This show is broadcast live from the Cairns FM studio, which is on the land of the Yidinji people. We'd like to extend our respect to elders past and present. That's all for this week. Best fishes, and see you next time.